Hey everybody, what's up? It's Tom here from toolswithtom.com, taking you through the next of our series of Excel for marketers today. And what we're going to be touching on today is starting out looking at how you can use the Vlookup function for your business. And this is a formula that I think out of all of the ones that you'll need to learn, this is probably the most critical that really sets apart people who can use Excel kind of okay to using it very well. So what the VLOOKUP formula allows you to do is using a criteria, which is usually going to be something like an email address, a user ID, or a name, be able to match up that criteria against a list of rows and be able to find that criteria within those lists of rows. So that might sound like a bit of a mouthful at the moment, but what essentially that does is allows me to see, for example, if I've got two lists of email addresses, work out, okay, these are two different lists. How do I work out how many email addresses are in both lists? Or from my one list over here, where maybe I've got a list of leads that I acquired through a partner I was working with or doing some kind of advertising, how can I then tie that back to my revenue figures using the email address of the user across both? And so what I wanted to run through as an example of getting started with the VLOOKUP was, let's just say I run a site and I have a pop-up box on my site. So very similar to what the likes of Opt-in, Monster, and Sumo and a range of these companies do. And so let's just use this as an example. And I say, okay, I've got a pop-up box running on my blog. I want to work out of all of the people who entered their email address in this pop-up box in January 2017, how many of them then went through and completed purchases for me within that same month. And so if we go then to my example spreadsheet, you can see at the bottom, I've got two different sheets. I've got one, which is the revenue of January 2017. And what this has, it's a master revenue of all of the customers, their names, their email addresses, and then the revenue that they generated within that month. And then I have another sheet here where I've done, for example, I've exported all of my people who subscribed using the opt-in box, and now I want to work out how valuable those users have been to me. So essentially, I've got, in this list, I have 1,051 records. In this list, I've only got 1,000 records. So chances are there's going to be some people in here that didn't purchase, and hopefully there's going to be some that did. I just want to work out how effective this is from both acquiring users and then all the way through to generating revenue from them. So how I go about doing this, and we're going to do this in a really simple way to begin, is I'm going to move all of the data here from subscriber email addresses. I'm just going to select at the top here where there's column A. I'm going to click on that, right click and go to copy. And I'm going to take all of that data. I'm going to go over to revenue January 2017, right click. Let's just move it to, say, column E. And I'm going to go and click on paste, and I'm just going to do a regular paste. Okay, so now across here, I've got my whole list of the pop-up subscribers. And so you can see that this list, as we said, it's 1,051. This is 1,000. Now I've got to work out on these email addresses how many purchases actually came by cross-referencing it against my revenue, which is over here. So what I might just do so that we're all clear is I'll name this one revenue, and this one is subscribers to check. Cool. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is set out the criteria of my VLOOKUP formula that I'm going to run. And I'm going to use, in this particular example, I'm going to go up here where it says that it's got the F and the X and it says insert function, because this is a little bit more of a difficult formula to get your head around. So I'm going to click on this to begin. And first thing it's saying is, okay, which function do I want to use? You can see VLOOKUP's at the top of my list, but if it wasn't there, you just have to search for a function, VLOOKUP, and you can see that it's right there ready to go. So I click on OK. Okay, now it's going to ask me for some different fields that I need to do to get my VLOOKUP formula running. So the first thing it needs is a lookup value. So the lookup value is going to be the unique identifier you're going to use to essentially run against the range of results. So for our particular example, we have a list of subscriber email addresses. We want to cross-reference that with our revenue spreadsheet. And the one commonality between both of these sets of data is the email address. So our lookup value is going to be our email address, and it's going to be the first one that we have here, which comes into E3. So I'm going to click an E3 as my lookup value. The next thing it asks me for is what's called table array. So what the table array is essentially what is the range of cells that we're going to be looking across to be able to determine whether or not the value of our lookup value is within that range. So what we're going to use for our table array is going to need to include obviously the email addresses, so we have something to match up, and then the additional data we want to pull that's in the corresponding columns next to the email addresses. So what we're going to need for this particular example, table array, I want to choose column B, but I also want to choose column C as well. So I'm just going to change that one to be B and C as the columns that I'm going to look up. And so the reason I don't want to include column A as part of this is that how the Vlookup formula works is it looks at the very left column first as its way of being able to match up the range. So because we're trying to then look up email addresses, if we were trying to look up email addresses on full names, we would just get all, not available because they're not, corresponding sets of data. So BC is going to be, in this example, our table array. And then what I need to include in here is my column index number. So the column index number, this is a little bit of a difficult one to get your head around at first, but essentially what this is saying is which of the columns are we looking to return. So if I've got B and C as the data within my spreadsheet, so column B and column C, column B we know includes the email addresses and column C includes the revenue. And so as a result of that, we need to essentially choose of those two columns that we've got, first column and second column, which one we want to pull as the value that we want to run next to it. So if we were to choose and put a number 1 in here, what would then return, as you can see in the example, is it would return email addresses to say, yes, this email address is in both lists, or no, this email address is not in both lists. But for this particular example, we're going to use the number 2. And the reason that we want to use the number 2 is we don't want it to pull the first column being the email addresses. We want it to pull the second column, which is the revenue. So now you can see in my example, it's actually for this cell, there was a revenue figure. So that looks like it's working. The last little thing we need to do in our range lookup is we need to put in here whether we want it to be on a close match or an exact match. Now, I very, very rarely find myself using anything to do with being a close match. You really ideally want it to be an exact match. So you almost always here will just put false. Put false in here, so we'll only return exact matches on that email address. Okay, so now that's ready to go. I'm going to click on OK. And you can see that for this particular email address, ejamesm7@wp.com, it's been able to find this within our revenue sheet and been able to pull next to it the corresponding amount of revenue. So we can actually just do a sanity check on this as well. If I take this email address, so if I copy this one, and then I go and press Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and then F, hold those two together, you come to find. And so in the find, if I actually then right click and paste in the email address, I can actually look it up within my spreadsheet. So let's see if we can find ejamesm7, and you can see here, yep, we found him here. And next to row 802 in column C, you can see $699.20, which is exactly what we just pulled there. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that's great, but why didn't I just do a find on all of these? Well, that's totally fine. And if you want to be, spending a lot of time in doing this, be my guest. However, what the Vlookup formula allows you to do, as we're about to show, is if I then click on this bottom right square, I'm then able to drag again this down. I click and hold and drag this formula down. I can do this down to once they're all done. Okay, I've got that now. And as you can see, on each of the different columns, we're then able to see, okay, there's actually some corresponding data in each of those. So it's run that whole thing on bulk. That saved me a ton of time. You know, if I was to go through all 1,000 email addresses and try and match them up, that's going to take me hours upon hours. I just did this whole thing in a matter of seconds. So now I can see next to each of the email addresses that do have revenue, there's actually then going to be a dollar figure. Okay, so this is really good. You can see also on the right here, we've got these NAs, and this is essentially where there wasn't a value found, which would mean that of those people who opted in, so these ones here, they have not done any purchases and they were not being able to be found in our revenue range over here. Therefore, there's going to be blank in there because it wasn't able to find and correspond the email addresses. Okay, so if I then, as a last little step, let's just say I take all of the data I've got here. So in all of this, I'm just going to quickly copy all of the data. You could hold shift and press down as well, but I'll just show you how to do it as well. If we just quickly drag that down. Okay, get to the bottom of all of my data. I can right click then and go to copy again. Now, if we then add a new sheet, so I just click down here on the plus. Now here, I could just paste this. I could press Control V or Command V and paste this, but if I right click and then go to paste values, as we've done previously in a few of these videos, what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to remove the formula, which means it's going to be much easier to play with the data. Okay, so now that I've pasted that data, the last little thing that I want to go about doing is making sure that I can remove all of the NAs and make it something that's going to be a little bit easier for me to work with. So I'm just going to remove first this top row. And now I've got all of these NAs here. To remove all of the NAs, all I have to do is press Control F or Command F on my keyboard. And then from here, I'm going to run a find and replace. And what I want to find and replace is that hash N /A. And I'm going to go over to where it says replace. And I want to replace this with 0 because this is saying that they didn't make a purchase within this period of time. And then if I click on replace all, you'll be able to see that's made all of the replacements. So now I'm left with some really awesome insights into how everything is performing for the opt-in box that I've run. So I can then go through and see, if I select both of these columns and then go to data and go to filter, I could remove then all of the zeros, for example. So I could take all the zeros out of there. And now I'm left with all of the revenue. And if I select all of these, you can see at the bottom that Excel has summed that up for me. Or I can also just go and do equals sum as a way of adding all of these up, open parenthesis, put in all of the values, and then close the parenthesis and then press enter. And you can see that I've worked out, okay, I've had $22,192.50 come from my pop-up that's happening on the site, my opt-in, and it's driven that kind of revenue. So then I can work out and say, is that what I was aiming for? Do we need to then go about driving better results? Or can we look to maximize this on a larger scale? And you can all pull this all in just by the use of that simple Vlookup formula and a little bit of data manipulation. So guys, that's essentially it for today. Make sure you check out the rest of the videos in this series, Excel for Marketers. We've got a ton of new stuff coming out all of the time. Make sure you subscribe to Tools with Tom, and I will hear again from you soon.